Sure. So we are live streaming for those guests from elsewhere in the country who couldn't join us. So we're just waiting for the internet to connect and wake up. Cool. Good morning. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. To those in the room who have braved a very cold Joburg morning and a Saturday morning, no less, to be here with us. And to those joining us from around the country, welcome. Welcome to the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship Summit 2023, and particularly to this session, which is really focused for our external partners and, the relationships that we've built within the industry and are hoping to continue building within the industry. My name is Sarah Quipman. I am the Strategic Communications Specialist at Jakes Gerwel Fellowship, and I'm joined this morning by quite an esteemed panel, so I'm very happy to be here. Before I hand over to them, I'm just going to do quick introductions. So, on my far right is CEO of Jakes Gerwel Fellowship, Julian Hewitt, and in the middle here is Julian just referred to Gugu as our ancestor, so I'm going to roll with that. Gugu is part of the sort of inaugural cohort of Jakes Gerwel Fellows, and currently sits on the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship board as well, and is a NQT 2. So she's in her second year of teaching in the classroom. And then we have James, our partner from JET, and James will do a much better introduction of JET and the work that they do when he chats to you in a few minutes. But JET is our monitoring and evaluation partner. So that has been a really great relationship for us so far, just to sort of take a look at what we're doing and the impact that Jakes Gerwel Fellowship has had in the 6 or 7 years that we've been around. So that's enough from me for now, and I'm handing over to you, Julian, to just do a welcome and an introduction.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So welcome, everyone, to those of you I know, and to those of you that are joining us for the first time. It's a real privilege to be here. As Sarah said, my name is Julian, and I was very fortunate enough to have the chance to be involved in setting up Jakes Gerwel Fellowship in 2017. I think the other thing that I want to put out there and make noteworthy is at the initial days, I realized, wow, I needed to brush up on my strategy. So I did a master's in strategy at Gibbs, and somehow I survived, and so did the family. And now that we're really coming into what does it mean to have impact in the classroom, I'm also doing my PGCE right now. And I've just come out of a 5-week stint at Mamelodi High School. So for me, it's been a really exciting journey that I've been learning and following as well. So a really big warm of welcome to all of you today. Monitoring evaluation has been a big deal for us from day one. I think, after a year from starting, we already had recruited an M&E partner, and now we have some really exciting findings to start sharing with you. And I think we've been a bit cautious about talking about what we've done so far until there's a lot more evidence to support where we're going. And so, the opportunity today is to recognize the people that have joined us from day one, but also really to invite you to say there's something special happening here. And this isn't a very long session, but the intention is we want to share some of the results with you, and with the people that are watching on the live feed. But particularly you have the pleasure of just wandering around and engaging with our fellows. And, I was joking with some of our team to say, we're actually a bigger team than our first cohort. So we started off with 18 people on the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship in 2018, selected them the year before, and Gugu was one of those. And now we're around 218, and we have almost 100 in the classroom and 80 doing their PGC at the moment. And our staff is 23. So that's just a little bit of intro from my side. I'm going to just kick off, Sarah, if that's all right, just with this video. Nice little 2-minute explainer video for those of you who want a reminder of why we're here, and those of you who want a little bit of an update of what it is we stand for.
Sorry.
Are we in the way? Yeah. Okay.
My mouse has gone a bit cold here. Sorry about that. Okay, let's just see if I can kick that off again.
The Jason Fellowship. We believe the future is created with intention. So we actively work to construct a world in which every child is enrolled in a quality school, staffed by expert teachers dedicated to releasing their learners' full potential.
We also believe that it only takes a small group of people to create change in the world. Big thinking, bold dreamers who share our vision of the future and have the highest likelihood of solving the most pressing education challenges that South Africa faces.
This is why we invest in individuals who have the potential to improve the quality of education and thereby drive a much-needed shift towards a more equitable, socially just, and prosperous country.
As a Jakes Gerwel Fellow, you will gain a launchpad from which to craft your impact in the world. An inspirational community that walks alongside you and supports your journey, as well as the best possible learning experiences to set you up for long-term success as an expert teacher, educational leader, or social entrepreneur.
Our involvement continues into an alumni community of practice that fosters collaboration and aims to leverage fellow influence and leadership towards broader systemic change.
Becoming a Jakes Gerwel Fellow is an opportunity to reach your high-impact goals, meet like-minded thinkers, and create positive change in the world. Find out more and apply at www.jgfellowship.org.
Thank you, Julian. And I think that is such a beautiful encapsulation of really what the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship does and the impact that it has. But don't take my word on impact. I think let's hand it over to James, who James and the JET team, as I mentioned before, who are our monitoring and evaluation partners, have given us a much better view and a much more objective view, I'd argue, Julian, about what exactly our impact has been. And over to you, James. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So external evaluation is always tricky when it comes to this. You've got to build a relationship, but you've got to remain independent. And I saw with my team, in particular with Julian and team, there's been times, it's not all been seamless, by the way, Sarah. Every now and then, when I get a red flag, I know it's really come through a couple of levels and that there are issues. So it's not easy. But why do we do it? Because we want to do things differently in our country. Where we are at the moment in terms of teacher and the quality of teachers, and we've got deans here and we've got SACE here, something is not working. After nearly 30 years, we're still not getting it right. So we need the evidence to make the decision. So our work with Jakes Gerwel is to look at a longitudinal evaluation over 5 years. And we're nearing the midpoint now, if I'm not mistaken, Julian, we're about the midpoint, to be able to see, what are those practices that really make a difference in our country. We were chatting quite a bit about the ideal conditions for teachers to be in. Now, where are you sending your fellows? Are they going to nice, fancy schools with a lot of tech? Or are your fellows actually going to schools where they actually face the reality of the conditions of our country? And Julian, you're an example of doing it yourself. These are kind of questions we're asking. As JET, we quite often find that initiatives come to us and say, please evaluate us because, we want to go to the market and we want to advertise that we're good enough because, JET with its city record is saying we're good enough. I found this relationship very different with Jakes Gerwel. I'm finding it like there's a real intent here to find out what is working and what is not working. So it's been a good journey so far. It's not an easy one. And it's not supposed to be easy. And we're supposed to be close, but not too close. So it's a formative evaluation. So with formative, we mean, we have regular engagements and there's a course correction as the implementation happens, as opposed to waiting until 5 years are over and then telling them, sorry, guys, you messed up, or sorry, or encouraging you that you did well. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. Is that okay for me to start with? You want me to
Absolutely. No, keep going. Keep going if you've got anything extra to add.
Okay, so maybe the one thing I'd like to add just around this is, so where are we going into 2024? And I would put a challenge to the JGF around this as well. Are you doing things differently? As we head into elections next year and looking at how teachers are being trained, what is your contribution back into the system? So I know this wasn't a scripted part that I'm supposed to ask you today, but my pushback would be, as much as we can monitor and work with you, how are you pushing back into the system so that we can take learnings from what you're doing back into the system? And perhaps today's a good example. But let me put that question out there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, James. And I think as the conversation goes on, it is something that I'd love all of us to consider in the room, just sort of where to from here as leaders in education in South Africa. What does the future look like, particularly, as you mentioned, in an election year that is coming, and how do we continue to support both students and teachers within that ecosystem? So I'm going to hand it back to Julian now, just to talk a little bit about where we've been rather than where we're going, just for now. But Julian, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah. Maybe if I can just touch on one thing that James has said, which I like a lot. One of the values that JGF has, and we have some quite unique ones, but one is that we operate on the edge of the inside. And so what I mean by that is we are quite edgy, we're quite experimental. The kinds of things that we're doing are quite unique and innovative. At least that's what I'd like to think. But we've been recognized, on a number of different national and international platforms. So at least there is some of that to back it up. And so I think one of the real reasons that we have some very, big institutions in this room is really to say, how do we work with you? How do we start being on the edge of the inside? How do we start partnering with you? And so that's very much in our space right now. Before I go into the data, obviously we work with JET, and as James has said, we also really place a lot of impact, or at least value, around reflection and being open to feedback and seeing how we can grow and learn. And so in the back over there is Cephas in the black jacket. So Cephas is our first PhD in Jakes Gerwel Fellowship in monitoring and evaluation. So he works very, very closely with the M&E team. So if you ask me any very detailed questions, I'm going to forward you on to Cephas. But not only that, Cephas works very closely with a senior program officer who works more on the grassroots side, and he's currently doing his postgrad in monitoring and evaluation. And one of our teacher coaches who works very closely with our NQTs focuses on M&E in her master's right now. So it's a big deal. We're very intentional around it. So I really have the chance to share with you 5 slides around infographics, just to kind of paint the picture of what it looks like from the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship, from a more evaluative perspective that JET have given us. It's the first formative assessment that we're feeding back on. And it's there in terms of the data, and you will also see, okay, there's some areas that we need to work on, there's some recommendations, and I want to present both of those to you. You do have a copy of this in those lovely little laptop bags as well. But let's just kind of go through a couple of those. So there are essentially 4 or 5 major research questions that we wanted to tackle, or at least to tackle with JET. And the first one is around the effectiveness of the selection process. And so I would like to say that this is something we do at a world-class level. And we have been recognized in the assessment center space in India, in South Africa. And our application form looks at 6 competency areas, and it's all automated in the background. And just to give you a sense of scale, last year we had 23,000 people that completed the first stage of that, and then we whittled that down to 60 that then join us, like Gugu has today. So it's a big deal, but let's have a little bit of a look at this now. And so a couple of things that is quite interesting if you have a look here. So first of all, if you have a look at the bar graph on the in the middle, you will notice the yellow is our eligible application, at least on the number of applications we receive, and then the red is the number of eligible applications. So really, red is what we look for. It means we have quality applications coming our way. But what you should start seeing is there's massive growth in that area. So we started off very small, Prof, over there on the left-hand side with you and your team at the University of Pretoria. And last year we had 2,500 eligible applications that were fully completed. And that kicked off our selection process. Then I think the other thing that's also quite important to note, as James was saying, is, there have been some pivots. So as we move into the space, we realize we need to look at seeing where we can maximize our impact. And you'll see two acronyms, UTF, which stands for our Undergraduate Teaching Fellowship, and GTF, our Graduate Teaching Fellowship. And what you'll also notice is in 2021, we only had a graduate teaching intake. We had an overwhelming response from people that wanted to join our program, who were finishing their degree or had already finished their degree. And so that's a big shift we've made, because there's a chance for us to be more scalable in the space and qualify highly qualified teachers in the space of a year. You'll also notice on the top right, the left is in yellow is GTF. That's our graduate program. And so it's important for us to understand, for us, why do people apply to be a teacher? And that correlates with the undergraduate applicants. And so you'll see there's generally a bit of a similar ratio in those numbers. But very different reasons. What we noticed at a graduate level is it's less about the scholarship, because they've got the degree. So you'll see that only 15 of our graduates really thought that that was a big deal to inform their scholarship. And also hearing good things about the organization. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Now, what you'll notice top left is Gerwel saying we're doing a good job in the selection process. So I'm happy to get that. But here's one of the areas we can definitely work on, which is the map. So we work with 6 universities, and they're concentrated in those red spots, Gauteng and the Western Cape. And by default, it ends up also attracting a lot of applicants from those 2 provinces. So how do we work with you to make sure that that whole province is looking a lot more red than it currently does? So the next thing is we place a huge value in this idea of expert teachers. We want to set our fellows up to be expert teachers. And we're quite unashamed around the fact that you have to have very strong subject matter expertise. It's one thing to be great around the languaging of teachers, your pedagogy, but if you just don't know the subject matter to the level of depth that's required, it's hard to kind of earn that respect or to really be able to make that impact in learners. And that is one of the reasons why we've been quite strong around focusing on the PGCE and making our mark in that space. These are people that have gone through an undergraduate degree, and then we really support them to be the best teachers after that. So academic achievement is just one of the 6 metrics. But here's what I want to show you, which is quite exciting. So in the top left, one of the benchmarks we use at an undergrad level is how many of our fellows are getting an academic average of above 60%. And you'll notice that in 2021, it was 84%. And then last year, it was 88%. That's really, really high. This is just one of 6. So we don't say you get great academics and we want you. It gets weighted with lots of other things. Now here's something that puts me under a huge amount of pressure trying to do my PGCE. Just to the right of that, you'll notice that last year, 54% of our PGCE students had a distinction average. 54%. I mean, that's kind of unheard of, you know, and I don't know how I'm going to get close to that. So I'm glad I'm out of the JET study for this too.
We'll have to bring it back into
yes. So as long as there's no public disclosure of my academic results, we're in a good space. There's 2 other really interesting points that come through to me on this graph, and particularly with Ella and Sace. We've got a very strong alignment around the fact that, you know, the teaching profession should have high levels of standards and excellence. You know, one of the things that's fantastic for us is this net promoter score. And essentially what a net promoter score is, you'll often get this in surveys. Would you recommend this to family or friends? Would you recommend this product, this organization? And if you answer yes, you are a promoter. And that's in the red category on the right. And then if you're not so sure, or if you say no, then you are obviously yellow and then blue. Now, excellent in a net promoter score is considered 70 and above. Excellent, right? We're sitting there at 86. So there's something that we're doing very, very right around, you know, our contribution, in a very small way, of course, to seeing teaching as an aspirational profession and the kind of support and community we're building here. And then there's another marketing term called the affinity rating that is, very much a researched scale, and then particularly seeing the connectedness of this community. And why that's important is because Gugu is going to be an alumni next year. You're going to be an alumni. And you want to be able to make sure that there's a strong affinity between you and the organization and you and the Jakes Gerwel Fellowship community to carry on that impact through professional learning communities. So no pressure, Gugu. But what it's saying to us is the affinity rating of Jakes Gerwel Fellowship is at 83%, where they say that our organization is incredibly important to their long-term success in the classroom. And I get it. It's lonely, right? I get that very much. So I think I've got 2 more slides just to run through with you. So this is the first big kind of milestone for us. Yes, we can have good academic results, but what does that mean if our fellows are not entering teaching? And let's get a sense of where they were going into. So here we've got a bit more work to do. Now, the first thing is we're doing very well around employability. So you'll notice that at the stage at which the survey was conducted, 84% of our fellows were in jobs. And that's a big deal because teacher employment is actually a bigger problem than you think it is. I know Funza really struggle with this issue. Part of that is just what subjects you're doing and making sure you're getting to the right space, but part of it's also being properly prepared. So we put a huge amount of work into our fellows to make sure that they can put their hands up with a lot of confidence to get the jobs that they want. And the people that weren't highlighted as stars are taking maternity leave or doing a master's degree. So this is actually really high. If you factor in the actual numbers this year and last year, it's around 90%. All right. So here's a problem for us over here. 16 out of 32 of our fellows that were in the teaching space last year went to private schools. Now, there are a couple of caveats to this. The one is Gugu, for example, can tell you about she's in a private school, but she's still making a great difference to very vulnerable learners and students. The other challenge we find is very simple. When our students go to their teaching prac schools, 50% of them get jobs there. They make a big impression on the school, and the school says, we want you back. And the research will say that in your first 2 years as a newly qualified teacher, you need an enabling environment. Otherwise, you're going to wave the white flag and say, I want to go into corporates and leave. And we've got a long-term trajectory here. But how do we start moving that needle there? And that's a question I would love to work with you on as well, because we need to be more represented. We need to be in Bulangula College. We need to be in Mamelodi High School. We need to be reflective of the schools we're in, realizing the kind of long-term nature of what we're doing. All right, so I've got one more slide for you. And then that's fine that our teachers are entering the teaching space, and I'm glad we can say that we're doing a good job there, but are they having impact? And so what we did is we had one of James's successors, Nick Taylor, as one of our researchers on the ground. They did a randomized test of our NQTs, and together with another researcher, they went into the classrooms. They observed lessons, and they looked at what is the level of teaching competence that our fellows displayed. And this was after about 8 months as teachers. We got some very insightful feedback from that, and so much so that we're doubling the randomized sample so we can get even more qualitative and quantitative stories out there around, actually, there is something very exciting going on here. So this graph over here is essentially looking at the level of teaching competence that these Jakes Gerwel fellows who are observed were displaying. Now, 5 is like your expert teacher. Puti, there we go. You're on a 5. You're on the 5 rating, right? For normal people that are entering the teaching profession, you are still developing competence on number 1. Now, after 8 months in the classroom, have a look at where our Jakes Gerwel fellows were showing up. They were showing up around just below you, Puti. You're way ahead, right? But they are doing an incredibly good job around showing up on this scale over here. So for me, not only can we show that we can select them, we can support them, they've got good academics, but within 8 months in the classroom, that's the kind of competence that they're teaching with. Part of that is because of the incredible support that we have with our program. Dr. Lee Rosniak's going to be with our fellows today. All of our fellows go through teacher choices in action. We're developing a My Teacher Choices in context. This is brand new, doesn't exist in South Africa right now, to see how do we bring that into the induction phase of teachers. We have a lot of teacher coaches and mentors that support this as well, but that for me is probably the most exciting stat. I actually had to ask Jet 3 times to get this graph going so we can show just how nice that looks. But have a look on the top right. 97% of the NQTs were enthusiastic about teaching. That's something to celebrate in the country right now. Over 85% that Jakes Gerwel Fellowship contributed to their preparedness for their first teaching job. Very, very excited about that. 84% said they were very satisfied with the coaching that they received. So there's kind of warts and all, but the point for me is it's exciting, right? This is vision and action. When myself and Prof were sitting in 2017 saying, can we work in your university? And Google was still a figment of our imagination. To be here in 2023 to share these details with you is fantastic, and I'm going to hand back to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Julian. I'm very excited to be able to take those numbers and turn them into a real person who is sitting right over here. So, Gugu, very welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. If I can do a very brief introduction to Gugu. As I said earlier, she was part of our introductory or inaugural cohort of fellows. And what I've come to realize over my time at JGF is you have to be really good at acronyms. So I'm going to run a few. Gugu joined us as in the UTF program as a CF, and then she continued on to the GTF program where she became an NQT. She was an NQT1 and now she is an NQT2, and next year we hope that she will continue to be an alumnus. So what that all means is as a candidate fellow, Gugu came in her undergrad. When she went on to do her PGCE, she joined the Graduate Teaching Fellowship, which is what Julian mentioned. And now she's an NQT, which means a newly qualified teacher. And we have NQT1s and NQT2s. NQT1s are in their first year in the classroom, and NQT2s, like Gugu, are in their second. So Gugu, can you tell us a bit more about your JGF journey? What attracted you to this non-existent entity when you joined, and what has your experience been like so far?
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. So, are we good? Okay. So I guess in my matric year 2017, a little bit was I am looking for a scholarship. I would like funding. And then also the person I am is generally that I want to help people. I want to make impact wherever I am. You know, I was always a school leader and all those fancy things. So it was just really random at the time where I had just received an SMS, a link, apply for this scholarship funding. Of course, I didn't know what Jakes Gerwel was at the time. In fact, I think I went through most of the selection process, not really knowing what Jakes Gerwel Fellowship is, until like closer to the end. Like, it was surprising that I kept making it through. And I'm like, interview, okay, selection cap, okay, and then I'm like, what am I actually getting into? And I did a little bit of research, and a lot of it was be a teacher. I wasn't really sure. I had conversations with my teachers, and it was, when I think about what problems do I want to solve, a lot of it was in education, but I would say as a teacher. And then, this with the famous question in JGF, who's your favorite teacher and why? So I had my maths teacher, and he says, I guess to some extent humbled me, say, we have, one of the problems is there are these people making all these fancy decisions, but they've never been in the classroom. They don't really, we always have that thing, you're making this decision, but you don't know how it's going to affect the whole process. So then I'm like, you're onto something. And that's where I really did then put myself all into it. It's been really great. That was the start of something really beautiful. I'd say Jakes Gerwel has really molded me and nurtured me into really having a voice in the education space.
I love that you said your favorite teacher was your maths teacher, because Gugu is now a maths teacher. And if you could maybe tell us a bit more about the school you teach at, the context of that school. Julian did mention it was a private school, but please eradicate any beliefs of it being an IUB kind of school. It is an independent school. So if you could tell us a bit more about the school you teach in and how you came to teach maths as well.
So the school I'm at is called School of Hope. It's in Observatory, Cape Town. And it's a special independent school. We depend a lot on WCED funding and as well as donors. But the special part is that we cater to learners who are at risk and or vulnerable, coming from very difficult backgrounds, communities with gang-related issues. Some of my learners are living in group homes. They're not even living with their families. So that's the special part. And as well, that sometimes I'm teaching my age mates, you could say. I've got learners who are over 20 in my classroom. So that has been quite a journey. It's been quite an interesting space to navigate. We're a very small school, so it kind of helps that to learn and get my feet around the place. I'm teaching mathematics as well as mathematical literacy, and then economics is just only one class. And I enjoy it so much. It's my favorite, one of my favorite things to do, really.
I love that. Yesterday, when Carla Watson, our head of programs, opened Summit for us, she spoke about head, heart, and hands leadership, and really embodying that. And I think that is something that is quite prevalent in how JGF engages with our fellows and the learnings that we offer to them and the coaching and the mentorship that we offer to them. And I was wondering if you could just maybe reflect on some of the learnings that you've had and how has that head, heart, and hands sort of experience come to life in your classroom?
So with JGF, there's like a lot of program expectations, and I think the one aspect that I really loved is having a program officer, and then now having a teacher coach. So. And then I guess I'm in a special case. I also get to be with the CEO occasionally. So in that case, I've gone through a series of having people to support me, to guide me, or even just to be like a wall to bounce ideas off of. And it's made me a lot more confident in my decision making. It's made me a lot more like I know what I want to do, and because of all the reflection tasks we've done over the years, I'm even able to reflect on what I've done and then how can I improve on it. So much so, I'm also a grade head at my school. So it really launched me into this educational leadership space in my first year. So that was kind of crazy. But I'm really proud of everything that I've achieved so far, and I'm very grateful for JGF for it.
And I think, I don't know if Julian, I can't remember if you've mentioned this, Gugu is not only a grade head at her school, she's also the fellow who sits on our board. So she is ticking all of the leadership boxes, which we're incredibly proud of. So thank you, Gugu, and for sharing. And I'm sure if anybody would like to engage with Gugu after this, you're more than welcome to. But for now, I'd like to just pass it back to James, who had just one or two extra things to add. Thanks, James.
I hope I'm okay, Julian, if I ask one or two questions, so we don't get too close. The question that will come now would be, wow, this looks really good. The results are looking good, and it was interesting on that graph that you had to do 3 times. That knowledge was actually quite high, competence in subject. So if you have Nick Taylor and Lee Rusniak working with you, that's like really serious stuff. You know, Lee doesn't take any prisoners, you know, and so I think that's a really good sign. But I think what we're going to be doing with you now, as we go into next year, is a cost-benefit analysis. Because this is the next question. The question is going to be, see, this is looking great, and numbers are increasing, but, you know, are we spending so much per student that it cannot be mainstreamed? And so I think that's the exciting part that we're heading into now, is to do the cost-benefit analysis, CBA, for another acronym, okay? And I think that's what maybe next time we can talk to the audience about, because I think, you know, that's going to be the game changer. You know, can we do this at scale? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks very much, James. And that's a good point. And I think the reality is we've done something different, and it does cost money to do something like this and to put in the kind of support that's given Gugu the chances that she's had and our fellows have had. And so I think the reality is, yes, there's a discontinuity in terms of where we're at now and what we need to answer a bigger call, because it's fine to say we can bring in 60 fellows a year, but so what? Our country needs so many more. The one side of it is to say, well, we could bring in a lot more, but it's capacity and resource dependent. So it's the saddest thing ever for us to call people that are incredibly good, talented teachers and say, we can't accept you. And in the back of my mind, I know it's because the scholarship offering is just not financially viable for us. I'm very excited that we made the shift to the graduate program, because it means that we can qualify teachers in a year. So financially, that's wonderful, and I'm really hoping that Dr. Lala Maje is going to come on board and tell us that she's going to help support the scholarship side of what we're doing, because I think there's a very strong alignment in terms of the employability of our fellows and the kind of structures and institutions that are there to also support that at a national level. So I think there's a lot of thinking that we need to do to say, how do we take our flagship program and how do we open it up more? How do we take the bits that are excellent, like our selection process, like the work we're starting to do in our induction process, and start to really work a lot more closely with organizations and institutions that are also having these top of mind. So there's a lot of work on our shoulders, but at the same time, James, I think part of what we want to do is open up the problems to say, you know, we're here. We know that they're challenges, but at the same time, we see that, you know, we've come a long way so far, and how do we take this to the next level?
Thank you, Julian, and thanks for that, James. I think, you know, we would love to open the floor if there are any questions or comments for our panel, which very much excludes me. It's the experts in the room. So yeah, if there are any questions or comments on what's been said so far, we'd welcome them now. Rajan.
Hi. Eastern Cape transplant. Yeah, this is the first time I've been at an event of Gerwel fellowship, and it's been really inspiring, and it's been great to see your fellows and everybody that's involved. I mean, it's an amazing organization, having a great impact. I want to ask a little bit about your strategy going forward from here. I mean, you've had a big change to the graduates, and I think you seem to be quite clear about why that's an important shift for you in terms of the impact that you want to make. And from the discussions yesterday and also this morning, I mean, there seem to be 2 challenges that you're grappling with. The one is that you're going to have this shortage of teachers that's looming. So you need, I don't know what the numbers were, 18,000 or what was somewhere in the high double-digit thousands. And the other challenge is that you want to have impact in places of real need. So, for example, where we located one of the most under-resourced areas of the country, that's got the biggest educational challenges. And then you're also thinking about the cost-benefit analysis, right? It's like, what does this cost? So those are 2 very different strategies of scale, and they're going to they'll need intense resources and focus, because if you're just trying to get your numbers up because of this looming shortage, then you're just going to focus on, young people, and you're going to try and get as many graduates out, and that's just going to get as many of them out there as possible, whichever schools they go to, whether it's Westerford or whether it's Mamelodi or whatever, just try to get them out there. But when you're trying to go to areas like ours, where you've got a lot of very dysfunctional schools and schools where you've made massive impact of one of your graduates went to, because of their passion, because of their background, because of their ability and their academic ability. But it's going to be much harder because you're in a situation where the school might not be operating the way it should. It might not have the systems in place for a young teacher to flourish in. But they're going to make a big impact anyway just by being there. And also they know how the system's broken if they go to those areas. So we spend a lot of our resources being in broken systems because that means that we know how to fix it. So when good people go to the hardest areas, they can make the biggest impact. But those are two very different strategies, and you can spend a lot of resources on trying to go to the remote, under-resourced areas, and that for sure is going to be a higher cost, for sure, to get that right, and to give them the kind of support they need to make sure they don't just topple over and not be able to do that job. But you're going to have impact on the poorest of the poor, or you're just going to, which will also be a good strategy, is just get your numbers up and spend, it'll be fewer costs per learner per support, but you'll get more of them out there. So are you thinking about both of those strategies, or are you going to focus on one of them, and what are your thoughts around all of that?
I think scaling is a thing that keeps Julian up most nights. So I think that's a pertinent question, Rajan, and Julian, I'm going to hand that one over to you.
Yeah, so I think we're at an inflection point right now, and the reality is you've got to do both. So on the one side, we're not a numbers game, but I do think we can take a school, build a partnership with them in a relevant context, like rural Eastern Cape, like a township. That was the specific reason I went into Mamelodi, because half our learners in this province are in township schools. If we're not making a strong play, what are we doing? But I'm particularly interested in building strong partnerships with very relevant schools where we can get a cohort in, so that we're able to, over time, create a case study to say, this is the kind of impact we can have in these conditions in this kind of school, where we have 5 of our fellows in teaching positions and a number of people in teaching prac. So we need to be very intentional around what are the kinds of schools that represent the realities of the South African education system, and how do we create and almost curate the schools in terms of a partnership where we can work together with them and create that impact. And then we got the chance to say, well, look, actually, we do know what excellence looks like, and here's an example, and here's the data in these different contexts, in these different provinces. But if you want to make that scalable, then you've got to come on board, and we will work with you on that. The second side of things is we've been pushing very hard around this idea of the looming teacher crisis. It's a big problem, and there's no way we can be relevant in South Africa if we're not fully aware of the repercussions in our system and where we're making a difference in that. So JET are very active in the TICSA, Teacher Internship Collaboration for South Africa. It's one of the biggest public-private partnerships in the space, and all the players are in there. And one of our heads of department is also on the steering committee for that intention in mind. We feel, by fortune or not, we're in a really interesting space because we're one of the only scholarship providers that focuses on PGCE. So while we might be a little bit more expensive without any scholarship funding, we graduate a student in 1 year as a qualified teacher, and then we have the capacity through our induction program to keep that resilience and support them in tougher schools where they're not on their own and hung out to dry. So we feel there's a lot of opportunity in that, and we've had a lot of in-depth discussions with funders. But it becomes a national play because you need to go into a province, you need to run it by districts, you need to go into the different circuits, you need to understand how do you match the needs in that circuit and that district with the actual teaching subjects, because they're going to be very different. If you go to the Free State, the Premier told us, listen, it's accounting and economics. But even in the different districts, it's going to be very different. So we have to understand that. You go to our philanthropy, you go to Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, you go to the big philanthropies and they say, we'd love to get involved, but you have to get Funza here too, because otherwise it's too expensive for us and it's unsustainable. So you kind of start to turn something, small into something that actually needs a massive collaborative effort to really get the scale we want. And we've gone as far as approaching UP and saying, look, we need you to develop an online PGCE, because they practically don't exist in the public sector in South Africa. That's why I'm doing mine at Stadio right now. But that gives you the internship opportunity to go into those schools, and you're not limited by 200 people at the different PGCE departments. I mean, Stadio, you can critique them for all you want, but they've got 2,000 learners doing PGC with me and 17 other Jakes Gerwel Fellows this year. So that's the scale that we're hoping a public institution can bring, so that in the space of a year or two, we can make a really big play to say, yes, we've got a model, but we need to do some massive collaboration to get that right.
Thanks, Julian. Any other questions or comments from the floor? Yes, right over here. Sace has got something to say.
So I think this is what we want in terms of getting back, and also some reflections. And I think more especially because within the teaching profession, especially teacher unions, sorry, true. TGC. Whether rightly or wrongly, but the perception is there to say, why are we even training teachers to PGC? And I know CH is about to do the review on it, but how do we use evidence that is coming from this program to be, I don't want to say influencing, but informing the sector in terms of some of the positives that are coming from PGC, because the worry in most of the comments that I'm hearing, it impacts every single day. Like, here's why are you even registering students from PGC? Even worse, your provincial education departments, some of them don't even bother employing PGC students. It's a challenge. And therefore, I think the concern for many people, unlike what I'm seeing, is about the methodology and whether can a person just be trained as a teacher for 1 year. But I think the input that is coming from here and the findings in terms of knowledge, competencies that is there, it's something that I think we can use in terms of influencing and improving the space, especially around your APT base. And I think there are worries around PGCE when it comes to foundation phase and also your intermediate and senior phase. And I think from SACE's point of view, we're very excited to see some of this. And I'm even happy that your induction it's moving. And the whole issue of us wanting to have a full registration that is based on induction. It might be interesting to even come and see some of the work that you're doing. And I know we're working with DBE, in terms of the induction program, but it would also be interesting to see how that is unfolding and to what extent is it standards-based as well in terms of our professional. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm going to call it an endorsement just because I can. Unofficial endorsement, but thank you. Thank you so much for that. I think we have another question in the room.
Thank you very much. Mine is a comment, and I think I want to make concerning the issue of peace. Julian and I had a very long, I think around 2017 when Julian started, we had a very long discussion around, the approach and the model which Jakes Gerwel Foundation was going to use in terms of focusing on PGCE. And I was a strong proponent, advocate of, no, let's go the B.Ed route. And we had deep discussions around why the approach to, why following the approach of B.Ed rather than the one which they were following. But as you are saying, I'm happy. Actually, as I was listening to the narrative here, I think I'm converted. I'm converted to I've bought into the idea of PGCE, and I'll give you the reasons why. Number one, obviously, it's very expensive, as you said, to train people or to take them through this program. So if at all you've got people who are already graduates who have spent 3 or 4 years, in undergrad training, they have made up their minds in terms of what kind of profession they want to follow. And if you take them through the PGCE 1-year program, intensive, everything's about methodology there. They come there with content. Yeah, and that PGCE is professional training that inducts them into the profession. So, and hearing what this experience, the experience you have been through, and the contribution which you are making, I think made me, to have a paradigm shift around the issue of the model which you are following. That's number one. The second point which I want to raise, coming from the presentation, is around, where your candidate fellows go. There is always this bias around when you hear private school, you think about elite schools. When you hear about, quintile 5, you think about only privileged learners in those schools. But from what I've heard here, I think we always have to have a nuanced, view and perspective of when someone says, I'm from a private school, you've got to ask further questions, because it might not be the kind of private school which we've been having all along. So, lastly, it's also, I was interested in your stats around that spoke to students who, went into the teacher training because they had a scholarship. They did not want to become teachers, but because there was money, then they decided to follow the money. And along the way, they became teachers, which I found it, really interesting, and which it also shows that there is not only one route to become a teacher. There are different kinds of, incentives or compelling issues that bring people into the profession. So I found this, a very enriching input, but also window of what you guys are doing. Yes, it's not, we are not dealing with many, learners who later become teachers, but it's a small contribution, I think, that will, in the long term, make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think Gugu might have a response to that, actually.
Oh, yes.
Just the first point that you made. I just want to say I myself did not do a B.Ed either. I did my undergrad at BCom Management Studies at UCT and then did a PGCE. I guess I'm just affirming that doing an undergrad, not a B.Ed, for me it's also I realized that when my learners are curious about something that I became an expert in to some extent, I can, entertain their curiosities differently, or I can almost tap into that management studies degree, even though it's not curriculum route, but it was like, I feel like I did myself a better service doing a different degree of BCom management before going into education studies.
Thank you, Gugu. Yes, absolutely.
I'm inviting myself. I'm sorry about that. Mine is very short, and it's just a build on to the points that have just been made. And yeah, okay. I'm building up on the points that have just been made. We have an education system that I think some of us have lost faith in as well. So it's getting to a point where even undergraduates that we have as a country, we don't have much faith in them because of the quality of the basic education that they come from. So it doesn't necessarily hold very strongly that a person is a graduate. The point I want to make, though, is I'm wondering how JGF intends to package its selection process of its fellows. Because my view is that it is that selection process for me that actually churns out the quality educator you are hoping for. The 1-year PGCE, in my view, is a formal qualification that reinforces somebody who actually is a teacher by design or by choice, you know. So I think in summary, what I'm saying is, how is JGF packaging its selection process? Because I think it's very strong. It's a very strong process that the Department of Education can actually institutionalize or do something about, you know, because it does add on to the actual formal qualification itself. It's unlike having somebody who just graduated and just went into some other profession because of the money. You know, that's my input. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Many hands. I think no, if we could just hand it over this way. Yeah, we had this hand first. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson, and everybody in the House. I'm Thabo Manne, the President of NAPTOSA. I have to indicate that we are a professional union in South Africa, the second largest one in numbers, the second largest one. But with regard to the inputs and the development of educators, I should think we are second to none. I have a concern with regard to this PGCE. Ella said a mouthful with regard to the issue of the duration for just a year. You'll find that a person has a degree in sociology. Then he comes to your institution and becomes a teacher. And he or she wants to be a maths teacher or an accounting teacher. So that makes a lot of difference and a gap. So there is a gap between the B.Ed student and the PGCE student. There is a lot of a gap there. So how do you manage to close that gap? One of the issues, the gap that I'm talking to, is the classroom management and the issue of discipline in schools. Because once these new teachers cannot manage the classroom, cannot instill discipline, not punishment, discipline in schools, then they will drop out. Then we'll say a lot of PGCE students do not last in education because of the quality of education that they receive in those institutions. I just want to check with regard to the classroom management, what programs do you have that deal with classroom management and classroom discipline? And as NAPTOSA will definitely share with you the gaps that we find in our schools between the PGCE and the B.Ed and the college one. I'm from the college. I studied in college. I started teaching in 1987. I should think Gugu was not there. So we had what we call methodology. When we started teaching, we knew what is expected of us. The current crop of teachers, they cannot mark a register. A simple register. Those are smaller things that make education not to be effective. And those are smaller things that makes educators leave the system because of not properly educated. I don't want to talk about training per se. Thank you very much.
Thanks for those comments, Thabo. I really appreciate that. So I guess our premise is still the research does point to the fact that PGCE students do come from a stronger knowledge base in terms of the content. But I'm doing my PGCE over 2 years, and I'm very, very grateful for that. It's an intense program. A lot gets thrown at you in a very, very short space of time, and I find that I wouldn't have had the chance to properly reflect on it. When I was at Mamelodi High School, I was there from Stadio, and there were 20 fourth-year B.Ed students. And I was like, after every lesson, guys, come tell me about classroom management. How do I get a little bit closer to the mark here? What are the techniques that you've learned? I was quite jealous about that experience that they had and the classroom time that they had. So I don't think it's necessarily an either or. I think it's helpful that we've identified the PGC as a very strong mode to make a contribution. And if it's 2 years, I think that actually might be a great thing. And maybe in the second year, you go and intern in a school, so you get wonderful classroom experience. And I think that for me would be the best thing ever. 2-year PGCE, but you're interning for those 2 years. What we've done at JGF, as has been mentioned, is we've got very, very strong support. So we have teacher coaches that are incredibly experienced in their own right, that go into the classrooms, at least into the schools, and they support the learners, our fellows like Gugu there. So they're able to augment some of that experience. So if Gugu has a challenge around discipline, there are monthly online meetings that we have that speak to specific topics exactly like that. She has teacher coaches that she can call on and say, I've really struggled, help me here. But for me, whether PGC is 1 year or 2 years, I mean, that's a debate that hopefully we can be involved in. But I think the opportunity of internships that are doing a 2-year PGCE, I'm excited about that.
I think it's on now, right? Thanks. Glad you answered that, Julian. It almost felt like coming in to provide an answer to that. I think on my side, and it also feels good to be on the other side now, I can ask you the questions, right? Absolutely amazing. So, I mean, one of the challenges that we're seeing looming from Fundawande is the PYEI situation with the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative, and having numbers and numbers of teacher assistants or educator assistants, whatever you want to call them, who've been pumped into the system, and with annual contracts, some being retained and some not being. And it's a looming challenge in that you've got this cohort of young people who've benefited from an initiative and have the passion for education to an extent, but obviously are not qualified teachers. Their role is to assist the teacher in the classroom. And one of the questions I've been toggling with is, well, how do we actually capacitate for scale and make sure that these young people are not lost in the system because they already have the interest, they've already gotten the classroom exposure to an extent. So I'm wondering what role could, and I like what Kaya was raising in terms of JGF's selection criteria, because I think it controls for a lot of the challenges that we experience with teachers. So if we've got this cohort of teacher assistants or educator assistants, what role could JGF play in that space to actually capacitate the system using those very young people who are already there? And I think there's an opportunity to even strike partnerships to say, if a district has 10,000 EAs, JGF could play the role of, enrolling them into a PGCE, training them to become teachers because they're already in the system to an extent. It's a question, but also a plea.
All right. So the open invitation is for everyone who's in this room. We will love to follow up with you to have these conversations in greater depth. So we're not going to cover all the questions, but I love that. I'd love to see how we can collaborate. That's a big part of today. I know Gerwel's got the mic and Ella's got an answer to Zolani's question.
Because I just wanted to indicate that one of the things that we're doing from SACE's point of view is to say, how do we, and James, I know you know that, how do we introduce paraprofessionals in the sector? Because we don't, yeah, I know, that's why I said James. But anyway, be that as it may, we commissioned the research with vets, and we have the report available so that we can see how do we then advise the minister in as far as saying, yes, these young people are there, they came because of the challenge that we had in terms of economic recovery issues. But then in terms of the professional status, professional standing, we don't want to continue casualizing the young people in the profession, in the name of the teaching profession, and therefore we are moving with that one. And the research is done will be consulting also with the profession in terms of the implications. And obviously there might be an opportunity because we are looking at a qualification, not necessarily a teaching qualification, but something that they can do for a year or two. Obviously the universities also, there's an implication in terms of what kind of a qualification can we develop for such. Thanks.
Thank you. We are definitely going to go on with the last two questions. I'm just very aware of time in terms of the program for our day. But before I go on to those, you are more than welcome to stay for the whole day. I think the best way to get a feeling for the real magic that is Jake's Gerwel Fellowship, and our fellows are all here, is to stay around. But more on that later. Over to you, Gert.
Thank you very much. My name is Gerrit Kutsia. I work for VVOB at the moment. I just want to congratulate the JGF team. I think you've really moved, and I think I was there, Julian, in 2017 in Witty Green's office when we've met with you the first time. And it's just amazing to see what you and what the team has been able to do, and the contribution that you are starting to make in the education landscape in South Africa. And I think one of the kind of low-hanging opportunities in order to further emphasize that potential difference that you can make lies within your selection processes and the systems that you use to select. And, you know, if we talk scaling of a program, then it's one thing, but if you take certain components of that program and you can get that to contribute to scale, I think that is perhaps an opportunity. Because the one area that Funza Lishaka, for example, will be struggling with is around the identification and selection of bursary holders. And it is one of the first pillars within the professionalization pathway of SACE, and I think there's a contribution that you can make there. The second thing that I just want to mention is the comment that Gugu made around the nurturing environment, and I think that is extremely important when it comes to retention. And ensuring that we are able to move and keep talent within the teaching profession. And I'm so glad to hear that Bulangula Incubator is here. From long ago in my career, we used to try and work with them. And I think to have those kind of partnering organizations, because it's not just about what's happening in the classroom, what is happening in the school, it's also about the broader community. And keeping a teacher within a particular environment, in a particular school, is about how they fit into that broader community as well. And I think those kind of partnerships is incredibly important in order to ensure that there's retention and further nurturing of students. So well done and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Gert. And I think there may be one more question at the back of the room, if I'm not mistaken. But just to respond quickly to what Gert said, timing is a wonderful thing in that we are just about reaching the end of our initial stage of the selection campaign for our 2024 cohort. And we would love to hear, any extra input that we have from an industry perspective as to how we can continue to iterate that and continue to fine-tune it for exactly the purposes you were mentioning now, in terms of even just taking sections of it and scaling those for the benefit of the industry as a whole. And secondly, you spoke about that community and that nurturing, and you will see it in action now. As soon as you walk out of these doors of this room, you will see a lot of hugs, and you will see a lot of support and a lot of smiling. And I think Gugu mentioned it as well in terms of her teacher coach. I've spoken to some fellows and I've spoken to some teacher coaches who were teachers who said what I would have given to have someone I could call when that classroom got really lonely. So I think it's you're in the best place right now. It's all living in action right outside the door. But final question in the room at the back there, please.
Just a quick one. Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity. My name is Tabo. I work for Old Mutual in the foundation space. In terms of the M&E piece, I see the sample is almost limited to the foundation itself. I'm keen on seeing what the picture looks like nationally beyond this sample size. Of particular interest, perhaps for me, is I always wanted to be a teacher. I wonder, how does it look like nationally, and is that not a contributing factor in terms of the systemic challenges that you have in the education system broadly, but specifically in the teacher component of the education system? The rest, I have I'm conscious of time. I have quite a few notes that I've taken, and perhaps I'll interact with a few people afterwards. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tabo. I am going to close the session in its official capacity. So to those who have joined us on the live stream, thank you so much for your time. You, as I mentioned before, are more than welcome to stay for the rest of the day. We have a hackathon or an innovation challenge happening, which we are looking forward to allowing our fellows to really deep dive and brainstorm and seek innovative solutions to very specific industry challenges at the moment that have been presented to them by those working in the industry at the moment. And that's happening, I think, at 11. And of course, Julian, James, I hope you'll be around for a little bit more. We're here to receive those questions and to continue the conversation. So thank you again for your time, Gugu, Julian, James as well. Thank you. And we hope to be talking to you all very soon again. Bye.
Thank you for this. Pleasure. I'm going to have to remove this one now.
Yeah, we won't need it.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Pleasure.